Hello and welcome to episode 58 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Alex Koch, a saxophonist, flautist, and composer who cannot be bound to one location. Alex has worked with numerous projects in the US, Europe, and Africa, and toured internationally with the renowned Dutch jazz group, the Willem Breuker Kollektief. In this episode, we talk about unique collaborations with hip cinemas. We also chat about bright moments in the midst of tragedy that remind us that people are good, and a telltale sign that the gig might go sideways when the critiques start before downbeat. Moving on to the release of the week, this is Alex's Arachnophobia, an immersive work with the creative Opportunity Orchestra that pairs together the work of Alex and photographer Alan Pogue. This work was completed in 2002, but was recorded on the 3rd anniversary of September 11th in 2004. Although the work is not yet available in a digital format in its entirety, you can hear one of the tracks entitled Shifting Sands on YouTube, and for all things Alex, all of the time, you can follow him on Twitter at AlexKochGigs. Now moving on to the Monk shows of the week, the two that we want to plug are Lucy Woodward on Friday, October 15th, and the Gil Del Bosque Pulse Quartet on Thursday, October 21st. Tickets are available for the limited in-person audience at monksjazzclub.com, and as always, every show will be live streamed with links to donate in the top right-hand corner of the screen. That is it for all of the plugs and shows this week. Let's dive into episode 58, Alex Koch. This is Off the Bandstand. Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask about was when bamboo flute came into your kind of menagerie of horns, because I grew up in marching band and always would go every year to like the state marching band competition in San Antonio. So I immediately associate bamboo flute with the River Center Mall. And just hearing it kind of reverberate in the open air rotunda with tons of reverb on it. And it was one of those things where, like, you know, as a kid, you go, oh, that's funny because it's something different than you don't know. Right. And then it became this thing that I was like, oh, I'm so excited for marching band this year because we get to go back and like hear really proficient bamboo flute playing, at least to me, whenever I was that age. So When did bamboo flute start to make it into your list of horns?
Well, it's always interesting, and people that would travel would bring me one back, and you could play it. But I got more interested in it in Colorado. I was there for university, and then I stayed in the summer, and they had just started Naropa Institute there, and it was and the School for Disembodied Poetics, and then Carl Berger brought his Woodstock music there, that workshop. And the first summer was Indian flutist G.S. Sachdev, who was teaching at the Ravi Shankar School in California. And he came and gave workshop for a couple of weeks. And I thought that was, I attended that, and his accompanist at the time was a very young Zakir Hussain. It was just amazing. I mean, it was when they would do concerts and they'd play for us. It was mind-boggling. And so I got very interested in the bamboo flute then. But then I got a little less interested because with lessons with Sachdev, he goes, well, you could be very good, but you have to give up the metal flute. And that was his attitude towards it. So I became a little less proficient on the bamboo flute. But it was really, I mean, still have it actually. I have a couple of nice ones.
Do you find that is a common thing, that people want you to pick one or the other? Is that an industry thing, or was that just kind of a quirk that one person had an opinion of?
I think it just differs, yeah. I mean, some people feel that way, but I mean, and then the other night I was watching, YouTube. I saw Scotty Robinson playing trumpet and then tenor. And Benny Carter, of course, did that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. And in the old days, those guys would play violin too. So yeah, right. I don't.
Well, we were talking last week or a couple weeks ago with Butch Miles about how like Mel Torme would sing and then he would go back and play drums. And
oh yeah,
I think he said that he also played a little bit of trumpet too. So it's just like, and you know, people like now, like Veronica Swift. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Veronica Swift. Is really killing vocalist up in New York who sounds just like Ella. I mean, you close your eyes and she sounds like it. But yeah, she'll like post Instagram stories where she's playing crazy Be-Bop lines on piano, and then she's out with Chris Bodie right now.
Oh, nice.
And then you know, there's like a couple pictures of her bringing trumpet out on stage and playing with Chris Bodie, which takes a lot of confidence to like whenever you're standing next to Chris Bodie. But I mean, she sounds great on everything that she does.
Wow, fantastic!
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was there's a specific quote from an Austin American Statesman article that I had found that said, "I believe there are certain freedoms, beauties, and truths about music in the wild not captured to some sort of medium. And there's a magic of merging musicians, audience, and music all together in a particular specific finite moment of time and space together that can't happen any other way." Very poignantly said. I was telling Nikki in preparation that it was just like, man, I feel like every time I see a quote that you've said in some sort of publication, it's like a Pulitzer rehearsed kind of response, but it was really poignantly said, and that statement kind of accentuates the intangible part of the craft that is vast and mysterious. And I was curious, what methods do you employ in your playing to evoke those sentiments that are hard to explain and communicate? How do you explore those?
Well, there's definitely, it has to do with mindfulness. I mean, you want to be in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's a special moment when you're in a room with people that are listening. And it's, to me, when I'm in a room, everything that I play, it sounds different depending who's in the room. Like one time we were playing and Eddie Harris walked in, and all of a sudden nothing sounded, it sounded pretty weak to me.
Sure.
You know, or, yeah, it's just the way things sound. Or sometimes somebody's in the room and you can play something and it strikes a chord with them, and you may not know it, but sometimes you can feel it, you know, and you don't know, it might mean something to you. I mean, there's definitely an intention, and there's also, I mean, you can't really be intent to be in the moment. You just have to, and that's a hard thing. I mean, you don't always get it, but we have a few nights that are that make you want to play at least another 100 nights to get to that point again.
Exactly, right. What kind of elements do you try to pick up on in the room? I mean, some people say it's like the basic things of like the audience, if people are paying attention. Some people might go as far as to say, you know, I try to pay attention to how crisp the air might feel, you know, what the thermostat is set at, because like all of those things, they do affect how we play, but it's not something necessarily that we think about all the time. So what are those things that you like to narrow in on to be present in that moment?
Well, just what it sounds like. I mean, like you say, when you go in, I used to talk to Boy Ramachers a lot about that, and I'd say, well, do you know what it's going to sound like? And he goes, I never know what the first note's going to sound like, even after sound check. I mean, you hit the first note, and then you have to try to take it from there. But as you say, if the room's really cold, the horns are going to be flat, the strings are probably going to be sharp. You know, everything goes a different direction with air pressure, and there's some days, like you practice, when I'm practicing just long tones, a certain note will make the snare vibrate, or will make an ashtray vibrate, or something. And you just hear this other sound as you're playing a note. But it's not going to be that same note the next day, probably. I mean, it might be, but...
Yeah, right.
So it's listening, really. Because I'm not really... I tried. I read those great interviews with Stan Getz, you know, talking about how he's kept his eyes open and watched the audience. And I just never really... I kind of had to close my eyes and listen to the music. Yeah. And not think too much about, you know, like when Eddie Harris is there. Yeah. Don't think about that too hard.
Oh, for sure, yeah, because then it becomes very performative as opposed to this kind of honest expression. Yeah. And like we're talking about presentness and mindfulness. Yeah, and you know, the thing that you're talking about, you know, if I'm playing long tones and an ashtray rattles in a certain kind of way, it's a very John Cage-esque approach to being like every single thing that is in the room, traditionally musically instrument or not, is like this kind of, it all contributes to the whole of what what music we're creating and what sounds we're creating.
Yeah, it's a total mystery because you create something and then people hear it and then they take it out with them. Mm-hmm. Even though the sound is gone, they carry it within them.
Yeah.
Often, hopefully, you've touched them enough, or they whistle a little thing of melody, or later they hear something on the radio and they go, oh, that's, it brings back this memory.
Yeah.
So it's a living thing, music, in a mysterious way like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think the thing that people most closely associate to music is parts of their life or memories or considerable things that were either painful or joyful or exciting or scary. So it hits the nail right on the head. And, I think every musician at one point or another has a story of people coming up to them and saying, whether it's after the fact or right after they've played and saying, oh my gosh, it's so meaningful that you played X tune or the way you played this tune because that was my wedding song or that was, the song that we danced to or whatever. So all of it's profoundly personal and meaningful.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting, I was thinking about interpretation, because I think that was something, and not just in music, but just the way that you would interpret something. And if that had been their wedding song, they would interpret what you played in a totally different way. And a certain kind of way when you bring your interpretation, a personal interpretation to the music. That's not everybody's interpretation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, speaking of interpretation and kind of those things that we were talking about, everything in the room, the John Cage kind of thing, I wanted to talk about the Creative Opportunity Orchestra and kind of more avant-garde sounds like the sounds of, like Ornette Coleman and the sounds that you guys created. What was your first exposure to that sound and what about it captured your interest?
There's so many things like that. Probably the first record, in fact, a good friend of mine who's living in Taiwan, he just happened to be passing through town. We had dinner the other night, and the first jazz record, he encouraged me to get it, and he was a vibraphonist and a violist, and it was Gary Burton, Duster, with Roy Haynes and Steve Swallow and Larry Coryell, and that was pretty modern. I mean, I don't know that it was avant-garde, but just the sound of the vibraphone, and the guitar, electric guitar, because you hear rock music growing up. And,
sure.
And that was a real eye-opener. And then somebody had some John Coltrane records, so I listened to that. So I went to the record store and I bought Live at the Village Vanguard again, which was Rashid Ali and Jimmy Garrison and Alice Coltrane. That quartet. I think Pharoah Sanders might be playing on it too. And one side of it pretty much is a bass solo on My Favorite Things. And then I turned it over and I thought something's wrong with this record, and I put the needle, I kept putting the needle in different places.
Sure.
And thinking, this is, maybe I have to take it back.
This is out. Yeah.
Wow, I just figured that music doesn't sound like this. So that was really one of my first just, astonishing, not even having any idea what was going on at all.
Yeah, right.
And that was pretty early on in high school, just so. That kind of opened the door, and then from there, I got some of the other, that blue record of Coltrane, that I pretty much, in the old days, you had a record player and you lift the arm off and then the needle would just go over. So I slept with a lot of records. That was one of the records I slept with that would just play all night long.
Interesting. How do you feel that, because would you kind of fall asleep to it and just be kind of playing while you were sleeping? Or would you listen to it all and then go to bed?
Oh, I would listen to it. It just depends. I mean, I still keep when I'm in the car, I keep a record in the car for 2 or 3 days and listen to it 3 or 4 times or 5 or 6 times or just a lot.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, how do you feel if you kind of went to bed listening to stuff like that? I know that, for instance, if I have a lot of tunes to learn for any specific gig, I'll put on all the tunes and have it play while I'm sleeping. It doesn't really bother me. It doesn't, disrupt my sleep. Well, maybe it does. The doctors could tell me otherwise. But, and it just helps it to kind of seep into my subconscious, and then, my brain's still learning while I'm,
Yep, that's what we hope.
Taking a nap, exactly, right? That's the goal. So I was curious how you feel like that affects your playing whenever you do kind of live with it even while you're sleeping.
Yeah, I don't sleep with music like I used to. I mean, I really did growing up, and I don't do that so much anymore. But yeah, I thought it had a big effect. I mean, even in the old days, I mean, you don't know what. I mean, I remember somebody saying, "Oh yeah, you put a pyramid in your room and you play." I can't now remember the southeast corner, and it would sharpen things, So I practiced long tones to try to, And then the Sonny Rollins had the candle, where you're blowing, and you just try everything you can think of.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel like playing stuff that is more out like that helps you to express yourself differently or more uniquely than stuff that's like playing straight ahead? And do you have a preference?
I don't know. It's all become more the same now. I mean, over the years, it used to be. I mean, because growing up in Austin, you'd play a gig with Butch Hancock, which would be more singer-songwriter kind of stuff. Then you might go play a blues gig, then a jazz gig, then more of a Be-Bop gig.
Right.
And those are a lot of influence. So you want to play the music. I mean, that's a hard question. I mean, it's an interesting question because you really, your personality wants to come out in all those music. And I felt like at some points, even though I didn't know a lot of the riffs that went with certain tunes in the old days, people would just hire me because I would play something like Al Escovedo. I remember him going, play soprano in this tune and kind of play like Steve Lacy.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, wow, who would, what singer-songwriter would ever think about having you play Steve Lacy? Nowadays, sure, because there's a lot more cohesion. But 20, 30 years ago, I said, okay, Al, I'll just do my very best.
For sure. When was the Creative Opportunity Orchestra kind of formed?
What was that, 81? Early 80s. I had just, we just made a record called New Visions Ensemble, and that was Tina Marsh, Booker Michael, Rock Savage, and Horacio Rodriguez, who then was known as Cola Rodriguez. And we had made that record about the same time this group started. Carl Michael is Booker's brother. He's just moved back to town, coincidentally, and he and Tina started it together. Carl is a very good organizer and just the way he can get things done.
Yeah.
And it started then. And we wanted a composers forum for everybody to write. It was an experimental thing, and back then we were all paying very cheap rents, and so we could afford to be musicians, and we could afford to have a 5, 6, 7, 8 hour rehearsal. I remember we had one rehearsal, and KUT was much more community, so they'd say, sure, you use our studio. Nobody's using it today. And we could go in there and rehearse. I remember one rehearsal I went in, we played a couple of tunes, and then I had a gig. I went out and played the gig, and then I came back, and those guys were still rehearsing. People were coming in and out,
Yeah.
And we were all just really thrilled to try stuff.
Yeah.
And then we started getting older, the rents went up, we had families, we couldn't really afford to spend 8 hours at a rehearsal like that.
Yeah. For sure. Well, talking about having families, I know that you have a family of 4?
2 children.
Two children, right.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit in the Hall of Fame episode about how you've never been one that is shy to traveling. So I'm curious how, I think a lot of people here in town, I mean, Fabio Augustinus, Tommy Howard, they all have families, they all have children. And how did you balance, kind of family life and gigging and traveling and doing all that stuff? Because I think that's the $1 million question for a lot of working musicians.
Yeah, well, first of all, you really need that good support system, which I had. My wife was Air Force brat and was used to moving all over the country.
Okay, gotcha.
And knew how to just pack up the family and do that, and was very good at it. I mean. could book the tickets, could, you know, make sure we had this for that child, this and that. I mean, really was well organized.
Yeah.
And so I mean, that's, for me, that was the thing. The home was really secure. And she wanted to take care of the children.
Yeah.
And she did take care of the children. And the second part of that was being in Europe. Europe is a lot smaller than the United States.
Yeah.
And I was in a band with the Kollektief that was made of older people that they'd done 2-month tours, 1-month tour. And they said, and right after I joined, they had just done a 2-month tour, and or more maybe. They went to Mexico first, and then a lot of them got sick there, and then they came to the United States, and they had a opening, and they asked me. They didn't know anybody close at the time that could fill the band. So I joined the band. We did 10 more dates of the United States. Like, I think we started at Caravan of Dreams. We played the Great American Music Hall. Then we played the Peachtree Theater in Atlanta. We played MIT. I mean, it was just, and of course you're taking 2 or 3 flights a day.
Sure.
And all these transfers, because there's hub cities.
Yeah, right.
And at the end of that, they said, well, it's working out. You want to go 3 weeks in the Antilles, in the Dutch Antilles. So I canceled everything and went. And that's how I got my foot in the door there. But those guys were so beat after that. After that tour, they said, we're never going out for more than a month.
Yeah.
And I think we did once. But in general, you can go to Belgium and you can be back the same night from Amsterdam.
Okay.
You can go to Germany and you can be back the same night.
Gotcha.
And this was a pretty good group. We had a bus, and the guys we always had single rooms, which was important for them. And we would go to places, and maybe we'd be in one village, and then we'd run out from there. The tours like that with the bus. So they were pretty civilized tours, and we didn't really go out for more than a couple of weeks at a time.
Sure. Well, it's a perfect little amount of time, right? You get to go, you get to feel like it's like vacation/work, and you're seeing all these different places, and it's all cool, and then right about the time the fatigue sets in, back home, you know?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't vacation exactly,
well, sure,
but it was it was a lot of fun.
Vacation in the sense that you get to see places like you would be on vacation, but maybe you don't get to see quite as much of them. I don't know. I've never done an extensive tour, so I can't really say.
Oh yeah, you don't see. No, it's definitely, you know, you're hoping to get to the gig. You're like, if you're going to France, the restaurants aren't open till 7. Well, sound checks 7, so you're not eating till maybe afterwards.
Okay.
Like at 11. And then the call for the buses, who knows, it's 6 or 7. I mean, often it was 10, but still. Yeah. Or if you have a flight. Yeah. You know, right. I mean, it's pretty beating down.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
And I found that with that band, it was really, I mean, we came to America to play because we wanted that exposure. But the American trips were always the roughest because of the huge distances, and we didn't have our own bus. And we had to fly all these places, and there generally weren't really green rooms. And because we had single rooms, the promoters would put us in a cheaper hotel, and that was often out like on the highway someplace far away. Sure. So we weren't really in the center of things. I mean, that was definitely work, but it was great work, and it's so much fun to play. I don't know. I always thought with the Creative Opportunity Orchestra, had we had the funding like the Kollektief did, had our government supported us, that group would have just been world-class emissaries. Yeah. Really.
How do you recharge? Emissaries. Yeah. How do you recharge whenever you're on the road?
Well, on the road, I mean, you're very purposeful. It's about making sure you eat or get something to eat so that you can play the gig. Yeah, right. I mean, it's all about playing the gig. Yeah, right. When you're in a good shape like that, you know. They're not all the road gigs are like that, I know. Yeah, for sure. But this band was I just found it to be incredibly special. I mean, I told Willem one night we were at the bar, and he goes, "Man, what you like playing the band?" And I said, "Yeah, I always wanted to play with Sun Ra, but you know, I don't think I'll ever, you know, be asked to do that." And I think this is kind of like that, because it was like a family. I mean, the guys were together, most of them, for many years.
Yeah, and it seems like the not repercussions, that's a negative connotation, but it seems like the kind of remains of that family with the Kollektief are even still contributing now, because you said that the people who you're about to go out with are people who are from the Kollektief, correct?
The drummer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And Arjen, the bass player, is in Reeds and Deeds.
Okay.
So yeah, I still keep up.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of, like I said, a lot of those guys are a little bit older than I am, so they're comfortably retired. I mean,
sure.
Not comfortably, they're in a society that allows that. And that made a huge difference. So when you come off the road, I mean, I had my days free. It was really, I got to spend a lot more time with my family than when I moved back here. And all of a sudden, you're like, it's running
immediately. Yeah,
it's much more frantic here, and that's just acceptable. That's what we all do, no matter, we're all working, and that's one of the reasons 10 or 15 years ago I went back.
Yeah,
I had the opportunity to go back and do some gigs, and I went back. I just felt it was a little bit healthier for me at that time. Friends were having heart attacks, and people I thought, he's never, gonna fall down like that. But it's stressful. I mean, that kind of life.
And you said before too that you've always kind of felt like an expatriate, soul, like from.
Yeah, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while, and there I was playing with people like Paul Ballenbach, Frank Kimbrough, or Ed Howard, and all those guys wanted to move to New York. That was the goal. And I did not want to move to New York. I wanted to move to Europe because I had seen, I knew about Steve Lacy, I knew about Dexter Gordon, I knew about the expats that had gone there, and I had traveled there after college and just seen all the jazz that was there, and festivals and stuff down here in Texas. I mean, one thing that's great, you always have a balance, right? And living down here in Austin, we don't have a lot of national road acts. I mean, we may see somebody like Wayne Shorter or Herbie Hancock every couple of years.
Sure.
But when the Armadillo was here, that was fantastic. We'd go see Jack DeJohnette, we'd see the Art Ensemble of Chicago, Dexter came, Sonny Rollins came, and they would come every month. There'd be some great thing coming, and David Newman, there was all sorts of stuff, and now it doesn't, we don't really have a club that does that. Maybe Parker occasionally will bring somebody in, but so it's wide open for the local musicians.
Sure.
So what jazz gigs there are, they're not these guys from New York that are poaching it.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we're not even paying guys from Dallas, or they can't afford to come down here to play. So that's a positive thing. It's wide open for Austin musicians.
Yeah.
That's why Tomas Ramirez, he goes, I'm just on tour of Austin.
Yeah.
And you just, that's a good thing. It's also sort of a bad thing because you don't really realize, you're not on a festival with Max Roach or Ornette Coleman or seeing the new people that are coming up, and seeing how you play a festival or what happens there like that.
Yeah, there's a wide variety of different projects that I know you've been a part of. One of them that I really wanted to ask about was, talking about Alamo Drafthouse. I mean, it's kind of a cinema after a cinephile's own heart. Like they're always putting on really, really cool events and doing all like throwback movies and stuff like that. But I also read just kind of briefly that you did something over there with Nanook of the North, the silent film, and I could not be more interested to ask you about that.
I wish that was out, for a commercial release. I don't know how that would happen, but I have some of those tapes. And that was Tina Marsh that always, she had just such a great vision of like, well, what do you want to do? And it was just thinking way beyond, like, let's play a film. and she'd make it happen. She was really, really amazing like that.
Yeah.
And so we did that with Russ Scanlon was playing guitar, and
very
Ed
cool.
Jurasinski, Bill Meadows. That's right.
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful. We wrote music. We wrote kind of a couple of Ornette Coleman tunes that we kept in the thing. And Tina read some Inuit poetry and improvised on that.
Did it not already have music set to it?
Well, there has been different musics. In fact, one of the guys from the Kollektief, André Goubeck in Belgium, he did a musical score for Nanook of the North.
Okay.
So there have been different people that have done it. I mean, Bill Frisell, I remember seeing him do some film scores. He traveled for a while doing that. And the Kollektief, we did one that was, who was that? Chris Davis? But it was the Freshman.
Okay.
And we toured that for a few months.
Yeah. Man, that's so interesting. I mean, I was talking with Sean Giddings about this last week, but just kind of being inspired and working with different mediums is the coolest thing. I know that there's something that I wanted to talk about a little bit later, so I'll save it, but it was the kind of, we talked a little bit in the Hall of Fame episode about the Child's Christmas in Wales.
Oh, yeah.
And also, I'll ask you about the Arachnophobia thing as well, because that's working with a medium of the photography. But before I get there, a lot of people will hear about people having accolades in their career where they go, oh, they traveled in this country and then this country and this. And I know you've been in Paris and you've been in Spain, and obviously we've talked about being in the Netherlands and stuff like that. And people think, man, how do people get these gigs? What thing leads to another that lands them in these places? Because that's the kind of stuff that, I guess we just don't have the word count to be able to put that in a bio, But I'll ask the question, how did you get those gigs?
It's just your path. You're just lucky. You pursue it. I thought, as a young age, I thought everybody knew what they wanted to do. I thought everybody had a passion. I had this passion for music. I knew in high school I wanted to be a musician, but I had no idea what being a musician was. Yeah. And I had no idea, practicing or repertoire, anything. I just thought it would be cool to be with my friends and have a house and live there and play music all the time. And the rest would take care of itself.
Sure.
So, I mean, just along the way, those are the kind of choices you make, that if there's a party at one place that's a really great thing, it's going to be fantastic, but there's another place where there's a jam session, you're just going to go to the jam session.
Right.
And oddly enough, I sort of felt growing up at one point like everybody, I grew up with a 40-hour work week, so I tried to play 8 hours a day like it was a job.
That's a full commitment,
because that's what I thought I was doing.
Yeah, right.
And somehow it just did turn out that way.
Yeah.
Because you're always gravitated towards that light where you want to go. And I thought everybody was like that. And I was so amazed, and I feel incredibly lucky. And there's a naivety plays a lot of importance in that, I think.
Oh, yeah.
If I knew now what I knew then, I would have never. I'd probably be a teller in a bank or something. I don't know.
Oh, really? That interests me a lot, because a lot of people will say the whole thing of like, oh, if I could go back and do it differently, I wouldn't have it. And I'm not saying necessarily that's what you're saying, but what are some of those kind of things that are the light and the dark, but the light maybe ultimately outbalancing the dark?
Well, it's. When people ask this question, the times really change a lot.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I was growing up with Rich, basically, we had a house together. Our rent was about $45.
Yeah, right.
We could go and play, and we could make $15. Was basically a good gig was $20, $25.
Yeah, sure.
But you're making your rent in a day and a half, and because sometimes we play 2 gigs a day,
right,
or 3. There was a lot more work. It was a lot cheaper, but it was so cheap to live here.
Yeah.
And it brought a lot of musicians, and there was a lot of camaraderie, There was never competition, because there was work for everybody, we all, it was very, very bon ami kind of thing going on. And so when people ask now, I it's so hard. The rent is, if those $20 gigs, if my rent's gone up to $1,000, I mean, from 45, you can I need 20 times $15?
Yeah, right.
To make that the same thing. That's not just really going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's a tough, I can't answer that for anybody, but I mean, I know when my son was in school, we had a conversation once, and he goes, I don't know why we have to study this or that. What's the purpose of that? I said, well, the purpose is you're trying to learn how to learn. And probably the job you have when you grow up doesn't exist right now. The world is changing so much that you just want to learn everything you can and learn how to learn, and just, fortunately, that's a highlight of my life.
Yeah.
Saying that to him. Yeah. Because, he's doing natural language processing. That didn't really exist then the way it does now. And he found a passion, to follow.
Yeah. Man, Alex, that is brilliant. I'm going to keep that with me for a long time, that you're learning how to learn, and the job that you might be doing full time doesn't exist right now. That, like I said, again, it's all this really brilliant advice that it's just spilling out of you, man.
Tina Marsh was like that. Willem Breuker was like that. They imagined things to happen. And we had a great festival in Amsterdam every year. Willem started it. It was called the Klapper de Vuurpijl. It went between Christmas and New Year's, and it was the bang of the bell of the fireworks, and a big celebration. But back then, nobody did anything. So nobody wanted to rent him a theater. Nobody's going to come. Well, he started it, and then, 40 years he did that thing. And it became a huge thing until it became so popular that bigger acts would poach the theaters that we had been doing for years, because it became a big thing. But it was a fabulous festival in that it would have 3 acts a night. The first one would be pretty much free jazz improvisation, a trio, or John Chikai would come and play, or different people. And then there would be a classical group, a string quartet, but sort of modern, or a brass, or a small symphonette, and then the Kollektief would play. Yeah. And then on New Year's Eve there'd be a dance band. Yeah. So wow. But that was a huge festival. It didn't exist before. It's quite like what Tina created here in Austin. Beautiful. Well, talking about things creating and changing too, you mentioned that things just changed so much. We've kind of been on that topic of conversation. When you came back from those places like Paris, Spain, Netherlands, stuff like that, did Austin have, even though you had this tether here with people like Rich, whenever you came back, did it always feel like that warm, fuzzy home feeling, or did it feel like things were changing pretty noticeably? And did that affect kind of the warm, fuzzy feeling inside towards the city? It's both. Okay. Definitely. It's not as warm and fuzzy without Rich and without Tina. I mean, that's, or you can just think down the line with Martin Banks or A.D. Mannion. I mean, people that I really had close contacts with, and that you just walk in and you're welcome and you can play, and you have a language that you've developed over time. Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to say was that history is measured and marked by significant events that impact a large amount of people, and the tragedy of September 11th was obviously something that impacted a large amount of people. And while I can imagine that the emotional and spiritual kind of feeling and emotion was very very tough and very disheartening for that month afterwards, but I also read a little bit about, and I would love to hear just kind of in your words, the story of that gig that you had played that night. I believe you said that you were in Ohio or Iowa with the John Jordan Trio, and that it was just kind of this beautiful idea of community coming together. Yeah, it was. We drove all day from Texas up there and got in just before daybreak, really. So we were fast asleep. Our room numbers were mixed. We weren't in the rooms we were assigned to. We just grabbed the keys and went. So the drummer got a call from my wife and asked oh, your wife just called. Something terrible happened. Turn on the TV. So we turned on the TV and saw all that. And then we had just, we were all just beat. And well, now what? And we said, well, shall we play the gig? And we'll ask the promoter. We'll see. And they said, yeah, we need things to be to be played. And people came before the gig. They brought flowers. They brought candles all over the place. It was really quite it was not a ceremony exactly.
Yeah.
But there are moments, as a musician where you just feel that's what a musician is, that you're playing music for this broader, greater purpose, not just to get the money and the gig, but, when you get a good wedding gig that they want you to play at that wedding, that's a very important gig. Or somebody's funeral, they're not just looking when you're not just hired as a just as
filling
a function,
calendar,
but because they really want you. That's a really important moment. As a musician, all throughout history, I think that's the purpose that we really try to fulfill. But they're very super important. So that night, to get back to the question, that was super important. Somebody came up to the band and said, can we have the keys to your car because we heard they're gouging gas prices. Gas prices are going up, and we want to fill your car up so you can get to the next gig.
Whoa.
Somebody did that for us. So I had just moved back from Europe, and I was sort of settling at that time. And then that happened, and I thought, oh man, I'm in the middle of rural America, out in the wheat fields, and this is going to be just, a nightmare, what Children of the Corn or something.
Okay.
And but it was the most beautiful experience. It just totally changed my whole idea about America and the people that are in America. The actual people.
Yeah, sure.
We didn't have politicians and stuff coming to the gig. So
Sure.
It was. But the people were so beautiful. Just to take our car, and of course we were trusting too. Sure, here are the keys. Hopefully, it's a good thing they didn't run off with it. But
yeah, for sure.
They filled it up. The next day, we go to the next gig. We play the gig, the same kind of thing. Wow. Everybody's in total shock.
Yeah.
And we worked our way just back day after day back to Austin.
Yeah. Wow. How many more dates did you have on the road?
I don't know, we had 5 or 6.
Okay.
Took about a week or so to get back.
Yeah, talking about how the people need that normalcy and the people need something to be able to have solace with the music. Maybe people don't often think about the musicians though, if you had a lot to give because you were also sharing that shock, I'm sure. So what was that like playing the rest of those nights and grappling with such a huge kind of national event?
Well, they can tell. They can tell you're putting out.
Yeah.
They can, it's an emotional thing, and you're in it together, and you don't really know what to do.
Sure.
You're in the moment. It was when I was playing one night, the very first night of this festival in Holland, and my mother had died, and it was the first night of the festival, and we had to play. And everybody was just super supportive, and I don't know what I played, but I played, and I'm sure it was very emotional, but it was very supported, and there are moments like that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think that any good musician tries to take things personal, or otherwise, whether they're sharing in like a big event like the tragedy of September 11th or something like profoundly personal like your mother passing, and try to channel that into some healing through the music. And that kind of leads me to want to talk to you about Arachnophobia. I've found a large amount of different articles from I believe All About Jazz and Jazz Times and Austin American Statesman, where they really talked about it, and that you had also been quoted saying that you didn't want to make an album that was necessarily political, but obviously at the time that you wrote that was 2002 and then recorded in 2004?
Something like that.
Something like that. So
it was recorded on 9/11, actually, I think
Really?
3 years later. There's a tune on there.
Okay.
It's a guitar solo by Buddy Muhammad, and it's called 3 Years Later.
Okay, gotcha.
It's to the day. Yeah, it's on
Yeah.
9/11 we recorded it. And that was pretty heavy, the band, because we were all in the space and
Yeah.
and just making that music.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that a title like that certainly makes a bold statement that is kind of loaded to the listener before they even hear a note, you know, just seeing Arachnophobia. And I also love that it's, you know, in those 8 different tracks kind of paying homage to Arachnophobia, right? Spiders, that is
yeah.
like, I'm a huge fan of like wordplay. So like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, I definitely owe you a beer at some point in the near future.
We're on.
That.
Right.
We're on.
I'll remember that. That's on record.
Exactly right. Now, I want to be clear for the record that he did not grab his coffee cup saying, "Here is that beer."
Oh, no.
Certainly not.
This is down the line. The beer is down the line.
Down the line, you know, 60 minutes down the line. No, but how did you kind of grapple with that? Because obviously it's something that's super topical, but you didn't want to make something that was necessarily political. So what was the ultimate aim of taking this, you know, photos of the Middle East and setting that as kind of a companion to the music? If not political, what kind of narrative or thought process did you want to evoke?
Well, you know, like a lot of things, it just didn't happen overnight. Again, Tina Marsh had a series that she was doing with the Creative Opportunity, and John Mills was, you know, of course, part of that, and so we're all commissioned to write something, and that had been on my mind, and I was fresh back from Europe, and. So the 8-part piece from Arachnid, that was a unifying element in the piece. And once I had that, thing kind of wrote itself. I mean, I went down to Waterloo Records. I bought a whole bunch of Iraqi music just to listen to, and not to exactly copy all of it, but you know, and just get those influences. Another piece that I had written for the sesquicentennial of Texas was the companion piece on that record called "Wake Up, Dead Man."
Right.
And it has to do with incarceration, and it was based on prison songs from a book called "Wake Up, Dead Man." And so I did take one of those tunes and then kind of rearrange it and extemporize on it. But at that time, I mean, in Austin, I knew Alan Pogue, and a fantastic photographer, and had been friends with Tina, had taken pictures of the band, was a fan, and he had a whole series on Texas prisons. And when we wrote that, we were at Symphony Square, and I asked Alan, I said, would you like to bring your photos from the prisons over and just make a quick little stand-up exhibition for our show? And he did it. I mean, just because that's the kind of guy.
Sure.
He just brought these photos, he set them up, you know, he did everything, and it was very moving to me. That's what started to bring it together. And
it's very immersive too.
Yeah, I mean, it was really quite fantastic. And then, of course, I knew Alan had been to Iraq, and so I had this piece, Arachnophobia, and I asked him. I said, would you like to? I'd really like to do this record, put these 2 pieces, and have your photos be part of it. And man, there were boxes of photos. I mean, he really spent a lot of time there.
Yeah.
And plus, I felt that those 2 pieces were sort of socially conscious, and he was definitely in my mind, Mr. Socially Conscious.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really a witness photographer, you know, you know, these prison photos are just heartrending, some of them. And, you know, if you look in the booklet, even at the end, there's the electric chair. And the pieces, but also Alan's photos, they're really about people. Like the Iraq photos, they're not about, there's one, you know, the cover is a bombed out shelter, and you're looking at through this hole of a bombed out wall.
Yeah.
And there's a city in the background, and that's Bethlehem. That's what the city is. You know, I felt that was so incredibly moving.
Yeah.
but he doesn't have a lot of photos like that. A lot of his photos are of people.
Yeah.
And so when you look in the CD and you look at that booklet, beautiful pictures of beautiful people, and I mean really under tragic circumstances.
Sure.
But I just found it so moving, you know, that these are really people, you know, and that's why I didn't really want to politicize it quite so much. I mean, I think there's a quote where I say, well, if you want peace and you're anti-war, okay, then it's a political statement.
Sure.
But I really felt that. I mean, I'm very proud of that. Just the whole production of it. And then we finished it. We did it at Wire Studio with Steve Sullivan as the engineer, and I asked Mark Kazanoff to be my musical director because it's a big band, and we just needed. I couldn't direct and play and all that at once. So Mark did a great job on that. Man, we really couldn't have done it without him. And then we finished we finished it. We were mixing it, and all of a sudden it's like, this is really not a very commercial record, you know. And because, you know, you go down the wall and you look at all these rock bands of gold records that they've recorded.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, well, what are we going to do with this record? And I thought, well, maybe we could use it as premiums for you know, death penalty or, you know, some kind of Médecins Sans Frontières. I mean, maybe we could get somebody interested and we could do some kind of good in that way. And down the road, actually, Nikki helped hook me up with the anti-death penalty people, and I went with Alan and we talked about our work a little bit. And for a while, the music and his slideshow was out in the lobby of some of these things.
That's incredible. I mean, to be able to use something that, you know, some people might call albums like vanity projects. I don't really see it that way. Even though we are making something that is something that we want to create, it doesn't mean that it can't also include us making things that we hope will make a difference, right? Because it's like we want to be able to express ourselves, but we also want that project to have a greater good, and to hear that it's continuing to kind of have that effect. And I hope that, you know, after people listen to this, that everybody will go and check it out because of the fact that, I mean, I was listening to Shifting Sands. I found a rip of it on YouTube, which everybody should go buy. Everybody should buy the album.
Thank you.
Don't support rips of things like I did on YouTube. Don't do that. But no, I was listening to Shifting Sands, and it is, you know, it's beautiful and it's haunting and it's kind of unsettling, but I didn't get the feeling that it was one of those things where you wanted anybody to feel scared, like in that kind of way. But it was really, it made me contemplate a lot. Be like, why are you giving us all of these like varied sounds on your horn? And also another thing that I had come to understand about the album was that instead of having like all of these, you know, where it's the full band, like maybe a 10-piece band or whatever, all together, you chose these kind of things where it was specific musicians with other musicians. And I read in that Statesman article from 2005 that you wanted to, quote, erase more sounds than I kept to make the music more transparent, as if you were seeing it through a veil. And I was curious, how did you see and orchestrate, you know, the impact of those select instruments from movement to movement?
Well, a lot of that, I think in retrospect, I'm not sure that I thought about it at the time, but with the Kollektief, everybody had solos. I mean, part of the fabric of that band was that everybody would have a solo every night, but not everybody on every tune. So there were features throughout the night, but everybody got to have solos, and many of the solos were actual solos, like Buddy's guitar solo. That's just a solo. And then Rich has a solo, which is another, the Eye of the Needle. That's another word play.
Okay.
And Shifting Sands was, I wanted to write something very improv that didn't just sound like Total Soup, So there's some written passages.
Sure.
I had, at the time, you had the old inkjet printers. So I printed out the picture of the sand dunes.
Okay.
And then I put the paper back in and printed the score on that.
Whoa.
For that movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so people had an image to improvise to.
That is next level composing. Whoa.
Yeah. That's how that worked.
Man, and I mean, I whenever I'm making records, I've said this before on the show, but I try to tell people exactly what kind of imagery or scene or memory or whatever I have in mind so they can keep that in consideration while soloing or playing or setting up the vibe. But to be able to print out a piece of imagery and then print the music on top of that is just going to a whole nother level.
Well, it gets back to interpretation. I tried early on with the creative orchestra, I wrote a kind of a little story about a village waking up in the morning. And that was our piece. And we were supposed to improvise that. But the interpretations were so incredibly different that it didn't work for me as a composer, And it's not like I want, okay, you play this note, or I want you to, how you get described.
Sure.
Like how many times have I, you're in the studio, can you do that a little more greasily? Yeah. Okay, well I get that with the saxophone, but I mean, greasily, really?
Sure.
That's a different, it's surprising how many times I've heard that. But, you want, as a composer, you want an interpretation that's sort of on the same thing. And it's like when we did It's Possible with Tina and Steve Feld. We listened to some tracks on headphones and played with the track simultaneously in the same studio at the same time, but not hearing each other. So there's one track, we did some experiments like that, but one track came out really very nice in B flat. I mean, we're all playing B flat, there's this rhythm, and there's a certain polyphony that happens that would not happen had we heard one another. But when you hear it, and back to John Cage, you're John Cage, Merce Cunningham, you're separate but equal. And that's kind of like, I find that's a really nice free improvisation when it's separate but equal. And I learned a lot in the Netherlands about playing free, how sometimes playing free doesn't mean you have to play with somebody. You can just play aggressively against someone. And it's not a personal thing. I guess it could be, sure, but musically, sometimes that gives you a very interesting result of a dichotomy of sounds. That, I love the sound of surprise. That's something to really strive for. And I know that's a niche. Not everybody wants to be surprised. Some people just want to hear what they like and what they know. And that's okay, because I listen to the same song in the car for a week or two.
Yeah, right.
And I get to know it. And I'm still sort of surprised by it. But when I go out and listen to music, I kind of want to hear something, oh, I hadn't heard that before. Or that's an interesting take.
Yeah.
Or, that's what I'm after, And that's part of the downfall of, being in your 60s and listening to music all your life and being really interested in hearing new things.
Yeah, right.
Because that's what I want, and so that's where I'm going, and that's when people come to hear. That's the double-edged sword. Some people, that sounds different than what he played the other night. Sure. When I came back from Europe, I had a steady gig at the Elephant Happy Hour duo, and people would come in, and then they'd go, oh, I thought you were going to play like Arachnophobia or more Ornette Coleman tunes, but that was such a great residency. Rich did it a lot of times. Doug Hall was a pianist. Floyd Domino sometimes would come in, and we'd play tons of monk tunes, and it was surprising to that's not your normal happy hour, but still. And then people would come to the gig at night and go, oh, that's really different than your happy hour. And so sometimes that was really good. People really liked it, and then sometimes they didn't like it. But
if listeners aren't, and I don't say this from any sort of position of authority, but if listeners aren't challenged, then we wouldn't have this developing of the lexicon of music in general. So it's necessary for us to continue to maybe challenge and say, not everybody's going to like it, right, but you're going to create new things. And, you know, that's the very essence of the music, is trying to keep that pushing forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not that you want to play music you know people won't like.
Yeah, right.
I mean, but you hope they like it.
You got to take chances. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I want to ask you the two kind of speed round questions that we have at the end. One that's very much directed towards what we're talking about. If there is a record that you would suggest that people go and listen to, and if you can't narrow it down to one, maybe you could say two or three, whatever your preference is, what would you say everyone needs to go check out immediately after this episode is over?
I've been listening to Helen Sung's new record, which has her violin quartet on it, which is a very interesting way of writing for strings. And Helen is a Texan and doing very well. Not a Texan? Yes, from Houston, I believe. And I just, I bet that's what I was listening to. And then on the way over, I loaned that record because I liked it so much. I loaned it to one of my best friends, and so he's listening to it in his car. But so on the way over, I was listening to Johnny Griffin and Horace Parlan duets, doing standards. Just beautiful. That's just I couldn't just turn on the radio. Yeah. I mean, you could do a Stockhausen, just turn on the radio and move the dial every so often and see what attracts you. Unfortunately, here in Austin, we're not having a full-time jazz radio station, so that's unfortunate. But there's some jazz shows. I mean, it's still interesting. It doesn't always have to be jazz, of course.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I mean, I immediately thought of some Stravinsky, or
that's perfect,
or Takemitsu, or Carla Bley. I mean, Helen plays wrong key donkey on that record, on her new record. It's a really great version with the strings. It's a really humorous, and yet it's all women composers except for one Billy Taylor tune. So that's the record I'm listening to, but there's so much out there.
So much out there, absolutely. Yeah. And then the last question that we have is that very humorous. We all have gigs from hell where things go totally sideways. You've played a few gigs in your lifetime. Can you think of or recall a particularly hellish gig where things went sideways?
I can think of several.
Hit me.
I mean, recently playing in a room full of unmasked people with a crowd. That just feels dangerous. That we're going to look back on this whole COVID period. I mean, as musicians, wasn't that a weird gig?
Yeah.
Or remember that time? I mean, and all like it's life or death in a certain way. Those things are terrifying to me. Going down to Florida one time with Rich and thinking we were going to take the world by storm, and getting booked by this kind of crazy booking agency to go up to Zero Beach and play a Greek restaurant. And we walk into the place, and the owner looks at the bass player and goes, "I don't like your hat." We knew it was going bad, sideways from that moment. And how many Greek wedding songs do you know? We had just come from Austin. We had a whole bunch of Rich's tunes, and we thought we were hot. We had some Wayne Shorter tunes. We had some jazz tunes. Wrong band, wrong gig, and that was a long time ago. But they're not all gems, as AD would say.
Absolutely, not all gems will crochet that.
But some are fantastic. I mean, I would like to say that, I mean, for any promoters and people, when we would go with the Kollektief, we had subsidy to go to these little towns. We might go to a little town in Spain or a little town in France. And man, they were so glad to see us. And we'd get off the bus and you'd get swag bags, or you'd get little hats, or the best cheese somebody that made. And people would bring you these things, and you'd just feel like, maybe it's not always the greatest, but it was the best. They were giving you their best, and then you were expected to give them your best. And so that's that's the environment you want to be in, not where you're, like, I love John Mills once there was a little club, you know, I said, when I came back, I said, what's it like playing there? He goes, oh, you're just a hat rack. You just stand there and hope nobody bumps into you, you know, you try to be, probably they'd bump into the hat rack less because it would hurt more, but you as a musician, they'll just, you know, that's not the environment you really want to be in. You know, like I played in Central Market, that is a nice environment. There's kind of a stage, and you're outreaching to people that don't hear you. But sometimes you really want to be in an environment where the people offer you their very best. You know, like years ago playing in France. You know, you bring you an aperitif. The food would be amazing. They bring you, you know, cognac afterwards. And oh, this is from my nephew, you know, this is from my cousin, and he makes the best in town. And they would bring you, like, you know, go to Italy and they take you to their best restaurant. Yeah. And so then you're encouraged to do your best. Yeah. And that's what you really want. Sometimes in Austin, or not just Austin, you know, that's all over the world. But sometimes you're, like we said, depending what wedding, you don't really feel like you're getting the best from these people, or I don't know, you're just filling a role somehow in there. Playing with Bill Averback. Oh, this wasn't a gig from hell, but we're playing. It was a klezmer band, so we're playing pretty. It wasn't totally orthodox because there were women in the band, but a Jewish wedding up in Dallas, and so they send us downstairs to. Wasn't really a green room. It was just kind of a big place where they kept the chairs, and they put out a table for us, and then they gave us ham sandwiches for our snack, and Bill's going, well, this isn't kosher.